and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Sunita. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Charlene. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Can you please lay out your family structure, birth order, and then what disability does your sibling have?
So, my birth order, I'm the oldest, and then I have my brother Shankar. We're about 3 years apart.
I am also the oldest, and then me and my sister are 2 years apart. Did you want to tell us about, you could give like a brief synopsis if you want about his disability. Obviously, we'll get into more like nuanced things.
In terms of my brother's diagnosis, he does not fall into a specific, I guess, bucket. I don't even know if I'm PC or category. I don't even know if I'm going to be PC in this podcast, but if you see him, he's tall. He presents like he has like almost a mild Downs in terms of presentation.
Okay, cool. I think that at least kind of gives people like a rough idea. So on the podcast, I like to keep it open forum just because everyone has different things they like to talk about, different life experiences. So what would you like to talk about today?
I have a lot of things I love to talk about. One is definitely about the journey that I've been on. I guess sort of embracing the sibling journey. When my brother was born, I think it was just a different time where disability wasn't, I guess, mainstreamed. Is that a word? There was a lot of isolation. So it was a very confusing time, actually, for me as a child when he was born, because I knew I had a brother, but I didn't really know what was wrong, so to speak. I just knew something was different. Um, and I remember just basically being like in the background of all these different things that were happening that I couldn't really ever explain. And I'm of Indian descent, and I think that, there was a further level of isolation in a area where there wasn't a lot of diversity anyway, and that already was, I wouldn't really say a barrier, but it was just a different time. My parents, I think, really struggled at the beginning because they weren't quite sure what was happening with him. They didn't, I believe they didn't bring him home from the hospital immediately. Just different things like that I'm learning about now. And I myself now am a mother to 3 children. So through that experience, I've kind of understood a little bit more of what it's like to have a child that has any kind of ailment that you can't bring home from the hospital. I now can understand how traumatic that was for my parents, and kind of isolating in its own experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting when after I had my first child, my dad referenced for the first time, I never heard him speak about a memory he had with my brother's birth.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And it was just hit me, really differently because I was so stressed out being a first time mom. And my son, had slight jaundice, and we were kind of back and forth with the doctor at that time. And I mean, it was jaundice, not to belittle that, but my dad mentioned that he remembers bringing my brother home finally from the hospital, and he got really scared that he stopped breathing as they were bringing him into the house. Like, I guess he took a breath and like he didn't breathe right away. And I, at that moment, could really relate as a parent how terrifying that must have been for him.
Mm. Mhm. That's something where, like, it's almost like you would never have, like, unlocked that part and memory, like, if you had not had children, which is, like, not a good or a bad thing, but I think it's fascinating, like, how
Exactly.
that it connects you to a very, like, specific point in time for you, but also unlocks, like, understanding why, like, your parents probably, like, did or didn't disseminate information to you about your brother, right? Like, it's so many layers of things.
Yeah. And the fascinating thing at this point is I can embrace it more than feel, I guess, resentful or neglected at a point with it. I really truly understand how stressed and overwhelmed they were at that time because he, again, nobody could really seem to give them an answer. Like I said, he did have Down syndrome, which I think, having a diagnosis sometimes might give us closure because we can define it.
Mhm.
And with him, there was just this whole thing of, what was wrong with him? Um, yeah, just little snippets. He was non-verbal until the age of 6. And again, these snippets of pieces come through as I experienced my own parenting journey. Um, little things my mom said about, his voice and how excited she was when my children spoke because it reminded her of, all that time at therapy to get my brother to speak. And the relief that all of us had, which, every sibling has different emotions surrounding whether or not they would want a family, and become a parent themselves. I met many siblings that chose not to have families because of the situation. And that itself fascinated me because I always wanted children. I always had a baby doll with me. Um, so, it was just something I knew I was going to do. But again, through that parenting journey, realizing with that first pregnancy, like when the doctor suggested possible genetic testing, it freaked me out. And my mind hadn't even thought about this. Yeah, so it just blew my mind to even consider what would we do.
No, that's so interesting, especially because like, now there's so many things. I mean, and again, like what you said, right? Everyone has their own, like, take on if they want kids, if they don't want kids, being married and not being married, even that's a conversation for siblings too, right? Because there's just so many layers of things. But it's so interesting now because, like, there is so much, like, genetic testing available just for most people, right? Obviously, like, I'm sure there's, like, a price tag to that, but it's just the fact that you can't, like, the average American on some level can access that is, like, it's so it's so cool, and it's scary, and it's like, "Oh, do you do that? Do you not?" Right? And then it's like, I don't know, there's so many things about that because it's
Yeah, and the whole what would you do? What would you do?
yeah.
Then you're given the decision. I mean, what a crazy power to have.
Yeah, and it's I was like, "That's terrifying," when I think about when I
Yeah,
think about it now,
I know.
it's
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
like, I feel
Yeah,
like being a sibling is already hard, and there's, like, 10,000 things about that, but it's like that then you bring in, like, the next level of, like, you yeah, like, bearing children or even adopting children, right? And that's a whole
yeah,
nother level of, like, just stuff that you wouldn't even think about unless if you're in that situation.
exactly, exactly. But his journey, I would just, like I said, it's been fascinating for me now because I've been able to step back a little bit and kind of reflect on some things. And his diagnosis itself has been fascinating to me because I never knew what it was. But apparently, when I don't even know, I don't even remember. It's all like a bunch of gray and in there in my memories. But I remember my parents were very determined to try to find out what it was. And I remember they went to the Mayo Clinic, and I don't really know again what came of it, but I just know that they went and some people came and stayed with me. I don't even remember who stayed with me when they took him. And then fast forward to just a few years ago when I was trying to get him on the puns list and trying to figure out about the diagnosis. And I asked my dad about this, and he produces a letter from, now I'm going to date myself, from some time ago, um, that said he was diagnosed with a chromosomal abnormality of chromosome 8, which I still don't really know what that means. But, and I didn't really dive into that, but it was just fascinating that so many years later, I'm actually getting it in black and white.
Mm, mhm.
Whereas, it was never really spoken about. I kept hearing something about something with a chromosome, something with a chromosome. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know what you're saying, but okay.
Yeah, because it's like you've gone your whole life just knowing, like, he's not normal, but then you can't, like, explain it to people, which I think even back then, even if you had a black and white answer, like, people still wouldn't have understood what you were saying anyway, you know? So it's almost like maybe it helped you because then no one could keep asking you stuff because you're like, "Well, this is it." Like,
Right.
this is my brother, like, you either accept him or you don't, right? Like, it's kinda like you do that or move on. You can't keep digging into what the, like, label is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And also another memory popped up when I was having these conversations, and this was actually after my mom had passed, and my dad, again, a man of very few words in terms of speaking about the experience, but he mentioned how much my mom went through with, therapies and different things with my brother, and how he really appreciated all her hard work with that. And he said that there was a family that they had a child that was born very similar to my brother around the same time in another town. Um, and apparently the mother took her life.
Oh.
And that really sat with me differently. Again, like I said, when you're younger, things sit a certain way. As you're going through the life journey process, things resonate differently. And that's that just my mind again was so sad to hear something like that. And how many other people probably experience something like that, we just don't know.
I don't know, and it's not crazy, that's not the right word, but the correct word escapes me, but it's just interesting because it's like, there's so many ways that people respond to, like, disability in various forms, right? Whether they're parents or siblings or whatever it is, and it's interesting how, like, within your own family, like, there's a certain response, right? And for the most part, I can, like, generically kind of say, like, your parents will react a certain way, and then therefore, like, as their children, you'll also kind of react in somewhat of a similar way. But what I think is more intriguing, right, is, like, the older I've gotten, and more so that, like, the work that I've been doing, like, in therapy, right, is that my parents, and everyone's parents, not just my parents, right, but each parent, right, has their own stuff that has happened when they were children that then, depending on if they work through that or not, will bring to their own family, right? That's just every family in the world, but, like, it's interesting how I think disability can, like, kind of catalyst certain extremes in parents and siblings and what's happening, right? Because it's like,
Mhm.
oh, if you're a quote unquote typical American family or whatever, and you just have like, two kids and a golden retriever, and everyone's happy and healthy, they get into school, they go to college, they get work, right? Like it's pretty like arbitrary. Oh, I had this really bad thing happen to me, but like, oh, like my family is fine, right? You can kind of work, you can again generically work through it, but when you throw in disability, like depending on how that triggers past events in the parents
Uh-huh.
can really like alter not only their experience but the person with the disability and then the rest of the kids, right? So it's like I think I've just had a personal fascination with it because I feel like growing up it's like cuz the difference is that my sister, because she's diagnosed with autism, has like a label. Right? So if someone says, "Oh,
Mhm.
like what's
Mhm.
wrong with your sister?" I can say, "Oh, she's on the autism spectrum." And people generally kind of accept that and move on, and there's like a like what you were saying earlier, like closure to that idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, like it's like I spent so much of my life like not talking about me because it's like when they see our family it's like, oh, the first thing you see is my sister, right? You don't think about, oh, like, oh, you have two kids. It's like, oh, you have a kid that's something wrong with, and then you happen to have whoever else is standing next to you, right? And it's like you're
Correct.
always kind of like talking about the rest of your family, whether it be your parents, your dog, your sister, your brother, but you're not yourself. And it's like, well, we matter too, but like you're a stranger in a mall. Like, what am I gonna do about that? Nothing. But it still sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like, learning more about our journeys as siblings. I finally read about glass children,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh, oh, wow. Yeah. I couldn't believe that there was something that could encompass some of the feelings I had in two words.
Yeah, I wasn't. It was funny because like I I don't know if that term is more recent, but I know the popularity of it has is a more recent thing than before.
Hmm.
But that being said, I yeah, I had a similar experience where like I was watching a video or something and I was like, "Oh, like that's a very good summation of how I felt." And I mean, obviously there's like other specific contextual things, but
Yeah. Well, I think that's definitely something, that I was alluding to earlier. Everything was going on around me, but nobody had really, I guess, given an explanation to me, like sat down with me. And it was interesting because being part of the sibling community, I was on, I forgot what it was, some panel, I think, or whatever, whatever it was, I don't remember. But somebody actually asked me, like, how did you learn about your sibling's disability? And I remember sitting there going, I don't really know because nobody's asked me that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that 1 hour that I was sitting there made me realize how many things, like, I had never really been asked. And then
Oh, interesting.
it kind of triggered a lot of memories from that, of just different snippets, like, you know um I think, we use that word trauma, and I don't want to overuse that word, but just different points where, he was in that separate quote unquote retard classroom, and
Mhm.
he went on the short bus to school. And, he obviously at that time looked different than other people. And his voice, even today, we're like, let's take it down a notch. He's very loud, um, very
Very
loud,
excited,
and
I'm sure.
very excited,
Yeah.
extremely social. Could probably, captivate an audience more than me in a sense, louder than life personality. Um, but, I think that that was a source of, and still is a source of, some bit of embarrassment sometimes with, with my dad, because we're Indian, we're Asian, like you want to kind of melt into the
Yeah.
lawn when you head out and you go somewhere.
Yeah, not being seen, you're like, "Okay, pass."
Yeah, yeah, and I remember even this, my mom had bought some Indian outfit for him, and it was like one of those Indian men's suits. It was very elegant, very nice, and I remember my dad and her talking about, he was saying, well, he should just wear a suit because like he'll stand out more. He'll stand out more. Like
Oh.
I think he really wanted him to kind of slide into the background, you know and so many things with that the poor man probably hasn't even processed his emotions with that because that's just not something that you do,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
um
100%.
so I've been really thankful to be able to have the opportunity to meet more siblings and talk about this experience because I think it's very soothing, empowering. um, it's nice to share collective experience. I don't think that I really understood the value of that until I found the SIPS group.
Oh,
Um,
for sure.
um, I know that I've talked to people who join support groups, and when I thought about joining the SIBS community, I was just like, is everybody just going to sit around and complain? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'll be really negative, but we have range of emotions that are shared, and I think it's important to share them somewhere where it could be understood, and I think that's the power of connection through social media, which didn't exist before.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, like, I still don't I mean, I have a better vocabulary now to, like, describe to people, like, "Oh, like, there's validation and there's, like, support," right? There's all these, like, better terms that I can use to explain it, but really, like, it's a feeling that really, like, it's really hard to explain to someone, like, you go your entire life feeling like you're alone or you're by yourself and that no one understands you, no matter what's happening. And then to finally have people that you don't have to explain stuff to is like such a big deal.
Hmm.
I don't, and like other siblings understand that obviously because like like with you and me and everyone else I've met, right, for this podcast, like I'll meet with everyone once and like we're good. Right, like, and then we can record the second time, but it's this thing where it's, like, it's so interesting because it's, like, there's a level of, like I feel like when you just meet, like, a normal person, you kind of have, like, "Here's the layers of my personality, and here's these things I do or don't ta" right, like, you kind of go through a normal filter until, like, you spent long enough with them where, like, "Oh, like, we're good friends," or whatever. But with siblings, it's like, oh, like, once you find out they're a sibling, you kind of just, like, throw off the whole thing and you just go into it because you know that you don't have to explain any of the stuff. And it's like
Yeah,
it's incredible. Like it's yeah, it's had I known that earlier, probably would have made a difference, which is why it's nice like I think moving forward in time, like it's going to be really great for like younger siblings who have sib shops, right, who can
yeah,
interact with older siblings that like they can like foster that type of community relationship and like understanding like early, and that's going to make such a difference like in their adult lives because you didn't get connected to a sibling community till like much later, right?
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I am really happy about that for the younger siblings because I feel like there's so many feelings that you have. For me, there was so much shame involved, and then there was jealousy, and then there was a feeling of isolation, loneliness, and some of that loneliness I think is just the fact that nobody can understand what it feels like to have this individual. But I do think that I've kind of come through the other side of it where I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Mm. Mhm.
There was that point where you're like, why do I have to deal with this? Why me? Why me? Why
Yeah.
me? But and you resent your sibling at a point because the point I'm at, I've lost one parent. I have another parent that's aging very gracefully, but aging. And, you know, there's a different layer of complication there, right? Where you're now transitioning more to a more primary caretaker role. And I was actually talking to a good friend of mine and said, I've realized one of the reasons that I am where I am now is the emotional exhaustion, where we have been caregivers from that sibling's birth. We're an indirect caregiver. And I hadn't really realized that that was part of it.
Okay.
Um, he was always there, and it's not like, he doesn't require any help with his ADLs. I mean, we're very fortunate in the spectrum of caregiving where he's at. It's the emotional piece, right? Community building and resources and things like that. But it's still a worry and a concern. So realizing that portion of it, and it manifested tenfold after my mom passed, because I really realized the void there. And one of our sibs coined the word, or at least I think she coined the word, sister mom. She said, Sunita, you became a sister mom.
Oh, I haven't
And I
heard
thought,
that one, but that makes
oh,
complete sense though. But yeah, see, I've learned something new today.
oh, there we
Yeah,
go.
we can
Yeah, yeah. And then it's it's even more
vocabulary.
mortifying when you have children that are older and you're out with your older children and your sibling, and people think that your sibling is your child too.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no,
that's kind of one of those where you're like, oh man.
yeah. That I was like, that's so much because you have your dad, your brother, and your children. Like that's a lot. Like it by itself. We're not even going through like
Correct.
the intricacies, but like that's a lot of like people to care about.
Yes, yes. And it's really amazing, like I said, having met so many siblings that have taken decisions not to have kids. And I knew I wanted those kids, and I knew that I wanted, at minimum I wanted two, because I didn't want that being alone thing. I wanted them to have at least one sibling, and in fact I wanted more children because I was going to make sure that nobody was by
Oh, right, right, yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, just in case, like
Just in case
yeah.
something happens. There's plenty of you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because I'm probably the extreme on that compared to other siblings.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, that and this is one of those, like yeah, like, you've taken one route, and someone who had your experience would have just been like, "Nope, I'm just not gonna have kid," right? Or like, "Oh, I'm gonna, like, have 2 dogs," or something, right? Like, or I get a kid and
Right.
dog, right? There's so many different, like, ways to make yourself feel safer about you not reliving your childhood through your children. Set like,
That's a very good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, like, people just have different right, and that's, like, kinda, like, the beauty of it when you kinda look on the outside, you're like, "Wow, like, that's cool," right? Because people have different ways to kinda, like, heal their inner child and, like, kinda cope with some stuff. And then you have other extremes that are a little more dire that are like, "Oh, you gotta, like, you gotta work through some stuff," and that's hard, right? But it's the nice thing is, like, it's I think one of the things that I was talking to someone recently about we were talking about, like, how like, when you have a conversation with somebody that's at least put in a little bit of work to, like, kinda work on themselves and stuff, you can feel the difference in when you talk to them, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
where
that's true. So true.
yeah, because if I talked to myself, like, 10 years ago, right, just, like, it would have been so different than if I talked to myself, like, 3 years ago. like,
Oh, wow.
would have been so different, just, like, with the
Yeah.
amount of work I've put in, the, like, amount of support I've gotten, like, and things like that, like, it's so different, but that in itself is tiring, right? And I'm not raising children or my sister at the moment, right? And both my parents
Uh-huh.
are in a like, they're, like, they're fine right now, so it's like, I don't like, there's so much I think there's so much more emotional, like, what's the word? Like, there's just so much more with the emotions than I think I would have ever thought being a sibling, right? Because it's like you don't. I feel like when you're going through it in real time as a kid, you don't think about. You just know that you feel lonely, but
Mhm.
you can't do anything about it. But then as an adult, you're like, oh, like that's where my all my exhaustion and all my emotional energy is, right? Is like in the connections with family and my sibling and people and like getting approval or like disapproval for that matter for some people, right? And it's so tiring.
Yeah, it can be. It can be very exhausting and overwhelming, and all those things that you mentioned. But I think that what I'm seeing is actually beautiful. My kids, I'm just fascinated with what education and awareness has done,
Mm.
because they I feel like I have seen them handle things in a way with family members and friends and community event and having a uncle who's disabled, just in a maturity that I don't know that I could have if I were them. And I think a lot has to do with awareness and just the resources and acceptance that are there that exist now. I think that's the most beautiful part of what I'm seeing. And realizing, in the world, there's so much negativity. But at the end of the day, I think people are pretty overall okay and kind and accepting. Um, I feel like for me, there was a point where I almost shied away from a conversation because I didn't know how to have that conversation. I, my voice was kind of, I guess, not given the opportunity to speak out. And I think now with, again, social media and just different supports that they have in school and different clubs and the integration of everybody in the same classroom, that's
Mm.
already changed that. And I've seen the way my kids respond and react to different pieces of life, and I think that that's an amazing accomplishment, that I feel. Um, and even working within the sibling network, getting the opportunity to connect, with some of the research studies that are going on. I've participated in different ones, and that also is just so gratifying to know that you could contribute somewhere
Mm,
in a
mm.
little way, and maybe impact one person. I know that that's been very important for me, and I'm so thankful for that.
Like, it's crazy how fast technology has advanced and, like, emotional, like, intelligence, kind of, like, in parallel to that has also just increased, just, like, the
Yes,
exposure of it, the teaching of it, yeah, like, it just is in its existence, like, it's exciting to know that, like, there are yeah, there are different and better ways to handle stuff that we've all been through, but it is exciting to see it, like you get to witness it, like, firsthand, like, real time, right? Is, like,
exactly.
when things are happening, yeah, like, with your brother, like, in public or whatever, like, it's yeah, like, I would imagine that, like, on some level, there's a part of you that flashes back to, like, a version of you that was their age, and then a version of you that's obviously there watching them in real time reacting in a different way than you would have, right? And it's so interesting to like, which is which is nice. Like it's nice that it's like there's hope for a better future in which like the like disability isn't going to be this thing where like, oh, we're going to send you away for like the rest of your life to live somewhere else, right? Like it's not going to be like that anymore. Like it's so different now than it
Hmm.
was before.
Definitely. And I think that, with this community building, the opportunities to facilitate change will increase. And I think that that's an exciting piece of the sibling journey, is being able to see that. I think that, in some of the forums that I've seen, it's very clear with where people are in that spectrum. Because I think sometimes, the natural progression in life is when you're younger, you kind of don't really understand some things. And as you're growing and learning and different experiences are coming to you, you're able to process differently and maybe be a little bit more empathetic where you weren't. And that emotional intelligence piece is becoming a focus area, I think, in the workforce, even. You see a lot of movement to building awareness, to diversity training, to being quote unquote a better leader, where you're more emotionally intelligent leader. And I think that that's just a collective movement and consciousness that you were describing earlier.
It's cool seeing like also like within the sibling community. I think it's really interesting because hopefully I will illustrate this properly. It's kind of like the visual is in my brain, so we'll see how it translates into words, but it's been interesting kind of like the like people kind of where their siblings got diagnosed somewhere in the 80s and 90s,
Hmm.
where a lot of those people now, right, are very much in the advocacy space of different things, right? Whether that's research related, like practically related to like their like a nonprofit or like just speaking at seminars or running panels, like kind of one that you were mentioning earlier, right? There's a lot of things there where they're proactively being involved. And so it's really interesting for people where their siblings are diagnosed in like the 90s, 2000s, right? Where they're getting exposed to that type of advocacy now versus before if you have when I talk to people, right, who their siblings are diagnosed like in the 70s, right? It's like people in the 80s, like you don't have those, you didn't have anything because they didn't have anything either, right? It's just like their siblings got sent away and it's like what do you do?
Hmm.
Right? So it's
Hmm.
been interesting to see the progression of how not only like the amount of diagnoses that exist, but also the like because of like diagnoses that are earlier and early intervention, there's just so much more opportunity for siblings to be able to say something because it's kind of a little bit more encompassing versus oh like you just like yeah versus something kind of more of an extreme like oh you throw chairs and you're dangerous versus oh like you're just a little off kilter like something's wrong but not enough where we can label you with a diagnosis.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I was just pulling this that I was reading. So I do a lot of um, reading with different spiritual books. And I'm going to read this because I thought this was very interesting. It kind of fell in my lap. And that's where I'm saying that recently it's like the culmination of all that work that you've been talking about and just getting connected. So this is so this is a very interesting thing I read, and it was about chakras. It says many healers and mystics believe that humankind, as part of the evolutionary process, is moving towards an even larger number of people who are fully developing this chakra. When the majority of people have developed the crown chakra, it is expected that humankind will take a great step forward away from the needs and conflicts of the lower chakras towards a more spiritually oriented existence. I think that kind of ties in to what we're saying, that awareness building. And that's what I see with the kids. I think there are a lot of negativities out there with what people are saying is happening in the world. But if you look at it from a different perspective, I think it's happening because we're in such a mass level of change.
Mm. Mhm.
And perhaps that's why we're seeing so much chaos.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I could see that though, because it's also because it kind of makes me think about like when change happens to a person, right? Whether good or bad or whatever, right? It could just be, oh, like your coffee changed brands or something, right? Something like like very small like that, right? And it's you have a choice to fight against that and not accept it and complain and do whatever, or you can choose to accept that it's happened and either choose to drink it or not, but you've at least like moved on. Right, and I
Hmm.
think, like,
Hmm.
I think that is true, like, on a much more massive scale, right? Like, when people's, like, jobs are being taken away, right? When their kids get diagnosed with something, when I go to therapy and I realize, "Oh, like, this happened in my childhood," right? Like, there's just things where your choice is to either you can cling on to that and keep fighting and resisting and being resentful, or you can choose to accept it and do something either about it or just let it pass and then progress. And I think that that's that is a big shift, right? Because I'm glad that like there are and it's so interesting, right? Because as humans, like I believe as humans, like we focus on negativity, right? It's much you like remember a lot of more of the bad instances that happen in your life than the good for whatever reason, right? I'm sure someone could explain that more scientifically, but it's interesting because it's like there for all the bad that is happening in chaos, like there are good things happening, but it's so hard to like remember that like there really is progress, like there's positive change happening and there's positive things that are making momentum and there's people who are like making a difference for everybody, let alone sibs, right? And especially like in the sibling community, like which is like where we're at, right? Which is there is so much positive change now that did not even exist like 3 years ago. Maybe not even last year, right? There's so much more momentum and motivation and like positivity and like encouragement and like, hey, I'll team up with you and do this things, right? There's so many people getting connected that it's like it will be a force to be reckoned with, like what as we move forward, but it's exciting.
Yeah. And I thought that that paragraph that I was referring to is just kind of interesting take on what I kind of see happening and some of the things that you're talking about. I think that that acceptance and letting go and all those pieces, that's really part of that healing journey, right? That discovery and that healing journey. So we've touched on a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, it's that's why it's like it's so fun having open forum because it's really we talk about anything. Like I like it's great. Like it's I love it.
Me too. And this has been again the best part of joining the sibling community is being able to share these experiences and have them truly understood
Yes.
by somebody else. I've even had the experience of meeting a sibling through one of the sibling forums that I was on and ended up meeting this sibling in person.
All
And they're in another
fun.
state. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And just different pieces like that. It's really beautiful actually to to be able to see people and get to know them. And I think what you were talking about earlier about, your conversation to your 10-year younger self,
Yeah.
um, and the conversations that are held with people who put work into themselves. I think it's just that intentional conversation. I think that that's what's happened within the sibling community, right? When you do get that time, it's an intentional conversation to share experience.
Yeah. It's so exciting. Like there's yeah, so many good things to come.
Absolutely.
I guess with that, what are your words of encouragement for other siblings listening to this show?
I would say stay connected. Um, Look deeply in yourself to find things that give you peace and joy. Um, there's a lot of us out there that want to support you. It's just a matter of finding that connection.
And it's out there. It's out there.
It is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. I hope you had a good time listening and feel encouraged in your own journey as a sibling to someone with special needs. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to hear more stories, please subscribe to the show. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, the show can't happen without you. All special needs siblings have their own unique stories, challenges, family dynamics, and lots of life to talk about and explore. This podcast is here to let you know that you're not alone and that you matter. If you would like to be on the show or just chat off the record, please contact me. My info is in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.